161. Sniper. Heh, you're right. It really is time to make a quick decision, Gin said as he put away the pistol he had been pointing at Vermouth. He pulled the bug he'd just recovered from his pocket, glanced at Kogoro Mori peeking cautiously out the window, and added, "The man who planted this might have left fingerprints. If we kill him and check the people around him, we should be able to trace who's behind this." Suddenly, Cointreau sensed something. He grabbed Gin's arm and yanked him aside, narrowly saving both of them from a bullet that slammed into the wall where the eavesdropping device had been. The shot made Kogoro, Conan, and Jody look up at the same time. Korn and Chianti, who had been trying to line up shots on Kogoro and that kid, could no longer aim. They stood up and looked toward the source of the fire. "Behind us, 8 o'clock, Korn said, glancing back at the building behind them. "About 700 yards. Cointreau shaded his eyes and roughly checked the distance. Jin shoved the bug back into his pocket, grabbed the sniper rifle Korn had set aside, and peered through the scope at the distant building. Shuichi Akai. Seeing the face that had fired, he tightened his jaw. On the other side, Shuichi Akai frowned. His first shot hadn't destroyed the bug. The eavesdropper's still intact. "That's troublesome," he muttered, and shifted his aim toward the man who had yanked Gin away. He recognized him, the sudden arrival at the harbor, lightning reflexes, decisive action. Nearly as dangerous as Gin. Not good news for the organization. Noticing Gin pick up a rifle, Akai realigned his scope on him. Gin returned the favor, sighting downrange. Akai fired a precise shot, aimed not to kill, but to ruin the other's optics. "Finally met you, my dear. Nemesis." The bullet struck the scope of Jin's rifle, and Akai allowed himself a small smile. Then a sting of pain across his cheek made Akai's smile vanish. Instinctively, he leaned aside. A bullet ricocheted off the wall where his head had been seconds before it would have been. Who else in the organization could shoot accurately from over 700 yards? He swung the scope back into position. As expected, it was the other man, Cointreau, who had suddenly appeared on the scene. Cointreau had borrowed Chianti's rifle and lined up on Akai. He fired again. "Tsk," he muttered, annoyed that his shot hadn't hit a killing zone. It had, however, clipped Akai's shoulder. Cointreau's position was lower than Akai's. Shooting uphill made things awkward, but he'd forced the FBI sharpshooter off his rhythm. Akai felt the sting in his shoulder and let out a short, muffled groan, but he recovered instantly. His hand trembled for a heartbeat, then steadied. He fired back to pin Cointreau down and stop him from taking another clean shot. Cointreau kept watching the muzzle flashes, slipping his aim between fire and recoil to try and line up a follow-up shot. Both men knew they were facing a top-tier opponent. Akai's earlier success had come from surprise. His target had been focused on Jin. Cointreau's opening shot had broken Akai's timing, and the follow-up had found flesh before Akai could fully respond. Still, Akai hadn't been hit in a vital spot. He'd taken enough to hurt, but not to end him. Cointreau found himself reassessing the FBI ace across the way. "Aren't we leaving yet? The cops should be arriving soon," Cointreau called over his shoulder without taking his eyes off Akai. Jin brushed away the dust and damage where the round had shattered the other scope and stared at the distant building with a hard expression. "Fall back, now." He ordered the retreat. Their position had turned bad. Of everyone present from the organization, only Cointreau could realistically trade shots with Akai. If they stayed, the FBI might close in and surround them. "But what about that detective and the brat? Are we really leaving them?" Chianti asked through the comm, driving while trying to keep a tail on the pursuing cars. Vermouth glanced at Chianti without expression. "This isn't the time to be picky. The FBI showing up here to snipe us means this was a setup. That detective's bait. Do you understand?" "That's..." Chianti flared with anger. Vermouth's words implied she wasn't sharp enough to understand plans. Jin cut off the brewing argument with a warning look. "Move now," he barked. Under cover fire from Cointreau, the organization members abandoned the rooftop quickly. Cointreau fired several shots in Akai's general direction to keep him busy, then took advantage of the brief window before Akai could re-sight and slipped away with the others. Down at the detective agency, Conan and Jody exhaled in relief when they watched the organization vehicles pull away. Jody immediately called in the direction the cars were heading and told her teammates to follow. They deployed units to tail them. Though everyone knew a high-speed pursuit could be shaken, still, they had to try. Inside the Porsche 356A, Vodka concentrated on driving, searching for a way to lose the FBI tail. In the other car, Chianti multitasked, driving evasively while asking over the radio, "Jin, what did Vermouth mean when she said the detective was bait?" "Idiot," Vermouth muttered under her breath, folding her arms and leaning back in the seat. She was already out of sorts, and Chianti's question only made her mood worse. Fortunately, Chianti didn't hear the snide remark. Otherwise, another one-sided argument might have started. 162. Secret Transactions. Cointreau noticed Vermouth was a little on edge. Her eyes kept flicking to Jin's pocket, where the listening device was usually kept. He knew what she was thinking, the fingerprints on that device. She must be worried that Shinichi Kudo's prints would be found on it. Vermouth's earlier remark still rang in his ears. If they hadn't known we'd be there, how could Shuichi Akai have been ready to snipe us from that building? Jin didn't challenge her theory out loud. Instead, he offered another possibility. Couldn't it have been a trap set up by Kogoro Mori and the FBI together? Vodka asked. That's unlikely, Vermouth said, half leaning against the window with one hand propping her head, speaking with practiced nonchalance. If the FBI were cooperating with Kogoro Mori, why would they let one of their own be put in such danger? My guess is the FBI got intel that Kier would contact Kogoro Mori. After Kier separated from him, the FBI found a way to plant a transmitter and a bug on the sole of Kier's shoe. Let's assume that's true, Gin said. He didn't contradict her. He wasn't entirely convinced either. But he added, today wasn't a complete loss. He produced the listening device that Shuichi Akai had nearly destroyed. If we lift the prints from this and compare them, we can tell whether they belong to the FBI or to Kogoro Mori. That'll tell us if they're working together. Jin watched Vermouth's face carefully as he spoke. Cointreau followed his gaze and glanced at Vermouth too. It was obvious why she was called the woman of 1,000 faces. Her control was impeccable. He had detected a flicker of anxiety in her earlier, but the moment she realized Jin was watching, she smoothed her expression. Cointreau needed Vermouth to cover for him in front of the boss for now, and he might need her help later, so after a moment he angled his phone so Jin couldn't see and sent her a message. Vermouth, sitting next to him, noticed the movement and soon felt her own phone buzz. With Gin's attention elsewhere, she unobtrusively checked it. The message read, "I'll help you with the fingerprints. In exchange, tell me about some of Rum's subordinates, especially those about to work with that Miss Ningguang. If you agree, tap the car window twice." A sour feeling knotted Vermouth's throat. Cointreau had a knack for exploiting crises. She had suspected as much. Despite appearances, he'd shown no hesitation when a gun had been pointed at an important contact, almost goading the shooter. She'd never been sure how much he truly cared about the girl he called his hard-won princess. They looked related, but files didn't reveal how close. Yet Cointreau seemed to know the backgrounds of the cool guy and Angel Vermouth cared about. It made her uneasy. After a beat, she slipped the phone away and thought it over. There was no one else who could tamper with Jin's evidence and forge test results if needed. If she wanted the fingerprints handled now, Cointreau was the only option. She hesitated, then tapped the window twice. Cointreau allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Jin, if you want those prints checked, leave it to me," he said aloud. "I know someone who can get results quickly. We should know who these prints belong to by tonight." Cointreau had no intention of backing out once he'd agreed, and he began to act immediately. Jin, surprised, Cointreau rarely volunteered, didn't balk for long. Considering he'd offered to come on the mission yesterday, it wasn't completely out of character. He unhesitatingly handed the device over. Vermouth watched Jin give it away with a mounting frustration she couldn't hide inwardly. Where was his suspicion? Why had he believed Cointreau so readily and handed him their only clue? She scolded him silently, but knew she couldn't do anything about it now. "Who's the person you're talking about?" Jin asked cautiously as Cointreau took the device. "Oh, you know him," Cointreau said, casual as ever. "Al-Haytham, codename Bordeaux." "Bordeaux?" Vodka's face registered surprise. He hadn't expected that name from Cointreau. As far as he knew, the two didn't mix much. Besides, wasn't Bordeaux a biology specialist? Why would he be handling something like this? How do you know he can do fingerprint work? Jin pressed. Cointreau tucked the device away and leaned back in his seat. I had to work with him a bit when I was coordinating with Kea. I thought him an agreeable person. He mentioned this to me afterwards. He smiled faintly. Al-Haytham speaks sparingly. If he says he can do it, he's confident. He almost used the man's real name without thinking, then caught himself. Vodka's brow knitted. The claim sounded odd coming from Cointreau. Jin studied him. You seem to trust him a lot. To be precise, Cointreau said, I don't trust him. I trust my judgment about him. Vermouth's expression hardened. Bordeaux, the code-named member of the experimental group the organization had recently been favoring. She'd met him a few times. Cool, distant, not easy to approach. How had Cointreau become so familiar with him? Then, we just wait for the result. Jin slid a cigarette from the pack with one hand, clamped it between his lips, and flicked a lighter with the other. Cointreau rolled his window down a crack, grimacing to avoid breathing the smoke. Don't worry. It won't be long before we know whether that detective has any FBI ties, he called into the night air. Speaking of which, Kier was probably taken by the FBI. What do we do about her? Vodka asked, turning to his older brother. That depends on whether Kier leaked any organization intel before they got her. If she did. Gin left the thought unfinished, but everyone in the car understood the implication. He took a drag and added, Still, I don't think she'll spill easily. Whatever it takes, find her. Fast. With the fingerprint matter temporarily settled, Vermouth had time to think of other things. Hearing Jin mention a rescue, she arched an eyebrow. Oh, have you got a lead? Leads? Pick a direction, and you'll trip over a dozen. Jin glanced back. Vermouth, whatever your relationship with Kogoro Mori, if that man is connected to the bug, you need to be ready when the time comes. It was a final warning. Then I'll just have to hope that fingerprint has nothing to do with Detective Mori, Vermouth replied, casting a glance at Cointreau beside her, who was leaning against the window and enjoying the exchange. Organization base. Laboratory. What is this? Al-Haytham asked flatly, holding up the eavesdropping device someone had tossed onto his desk. Not long before, Kea had told him who Cointreau really was. Once Al-Haytham confirmed Cointreau's rank in the organization, any hope of further clandestine work inside had seemed pointless. Cointreau could accomplish far more from within than Al-Haytham ever could. Since then, he'd been coasting. Strict 8-hour shifts, leaving the lab the instant his shift ended, no overtime. His clearance was high thanks to past research, and as long as progress was made, no one bothered him. Strictly speaking, this was his rest time. The only reason he didn't throw the intruder out was that the man was the traveler's brother. Oh, it's an eavesdropping device. Cointreau, noting Al-Haytham's cool reception, didn't wait to be offered a seat. He poured a glass of water, sat opposite, and settled in as if for a long conversation. I can see that. Al-Haytham ignored him, set the device aside, and went back to his book. Why give it to me? He asked without looking up. Cointreau explained what he wanted. Check whether there are any fingerprints on it. If there are, replace them with prints from any random FBI agent. May I refuse? Al-Haytham finally closed his book, leaned back, and fixed Cointreau with an unreadable look. I'm afraid not, Cointreau said, taking a sip. I already mentioned it to Jin. It'll be quick, and you'll squeeze a little more intel out of Vermouth. Quite the bargain, no? Then why not do it yourself? Al-Haytham asked. Alas, I don't know how, Cointreau replied, setting his cup down and propping his chin on folded fingers. The able should work more. Al-Haytham met those familiar eyes and in a perfectly neutral tone said, The traveler received a love letter today. Cointreau's head snapped up. What did you say? If your ears and memory function, Al-Haytham said, you heard me. He watched the color drain from Cointreau's face, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't expected the brother to keep his composure. He dismissed the news as trivial when Kea first mentioned it. Serves him right for dumping extra work on Al-Haytham so casually. Wait, this is real? Cointreau sprang to his feet, palms slamming the table, eyes searching Al-Haytham's face as if begging for a jest. Absolutely. I never lie. Al-Haytham lifted his coffee and took a sip, savoring the moment. So how did she react? Did she accept? Cointreau demanded, voice taut. He'd only just been reunited with his little sister. She was still so young, innocent, not ready for anything like this. He wanted to know which shameless man had the nerve to court her. Alhaitham hung his head a fraction, hair falling over his eyes. No idea. No idea. Cointreau was incredulous. How can you not know? You have a way to reach Xiaxi. So what if I do? Alhaitham raised an eyebrow. I don't care about the outcome. Why would I ask? I care. Find out. Now, Cointreau insisted. I decline. I'm busy with the task you just assigned me. No time to help you. Alhaitham watched the brother's composure collapse, then picked up the eavesdropping device, rose, and walked past him out of the room. 164. Fingerprint comparison results. Alhaitham walked to the door and looked back at Cointreau. Don't you have the traveler's contact information? If you're really that curious, you can ask him yourself. He offered the suggestion as if it were a kindness. Before Cointreau could reply, Alhaitham left the room. Oh, right. Remember to close the door for me when you leave. He paused a few steps down the hall to make sure Cointreau, still standing in the room, heard him. Given Cointreau's mood, Alhaitham worried he might forget such a small thing. I got it, Cointreau called after him, each syllable exaggerated as Alhaitham retreated. At the bar, Vodka sat in a booth with his big brother, gin and vermouth, sipping while they waited for Bordeaux's fingerprint comparison results. Big brother, where's Cointreau? Isn't he coming to wait with us? Vodka scanned the bar and asked Gin, puzzled that Cointreau wasn't there. I don't know, Gin said, swirling his drink. He just messaged that he had something to investigate and left ahead of us. Bordeaux will send the results directly in a bit. Gin glanced at Vermouth, who lounged with her arms crossed, and gave a dry laugh. We're about to find out if that detective you like so much has really been colluding with the FBI. Excited? Vermouth narrowed her eyes and raised an eyebrow. Colluding is a bit strong, Gin. Besides, the result isn't certain yet. By the way, Cointreau left in such a hurry. Did he say what it was about? Vermouth sounded uneasy. He'd left abruptly. She hoped he hadn't forgotten to tell Bordeaux to falsify the prints. No, Gin said, finding Vermouth's lack of alarm a little dull. He took a sip. He only said it was for personal business. Jin's tone changed as an idea occurred to him. What, you're curious? I am, Vermouth admitted, nodding. Cointreau had never had much of a private life outside organization missions. This was his first time mentioning personal business. Could it have anything to do with that girl? What had happened to make him leave in such a rush? Vermouth hoped it wasn't about Conan Edogawa, Ran Mori, and the others. Not really, Gin replied smoothly. If Cointreau wants to talk, he will. Of course, if you want to investigate privately, I won't stop you. Vermouth smiled helplessly and was about to answer when Jin's phone on the table chimed. Oh, looks like the results are in. Gin had deliberately placed his phone where she could see it. Vermouth caught the sender's name at a glance, Bordeaux. Her chest tightened briefly, but she kept her expression calm and smiled as she handed the phone to Gin. Vodka picked it up and passed it over. Gin opened the message, read the result, then looked up at Vermouth with a sneer. Congratulations. The fingerprint on the eavesdropping device doesn't belong to Kogoro Mori. It belongs to an FBI agent who entered the country with Shuichi Akai and the others. There's no need to congratulate me, Vermouth said, inwardly relieved. This was the outcome she'd expected. It seemed Cointreau had kept his end of the bargain. How he had managed to secure Bordeaux's cooperation, though, how he got someone as difficult as Bordeaux to help falsify results, was another question. Had he deliberately gotten close to certain codename members of the experimental group? Vodka, let's go. With the result absolving Kogoro Mori, Gin had no desire to linger. He finished his drink and stood. Vodka, momentarily confused, scrambled to follow. He remembered to look back and wave to Vermouth before leaving. Vermouth didn't mind. After they were gone, she sat alone, arms crossed, left index finger tapping her arm as she thought. Cointreau had done what he promised. According to their agreement, Vermouth now had to give him the information he wanted. After a moment, she took out her phone and composed a message to Cointreau. 2 names, Curaçao and Camus. She told him these were the 2 Rum had arranged to handle cooperation with the Ningguang Company and attached brief profiles of both codename members. Satisfied, she downed the rest of her drink and rose to leave. On the other side, Cointreau read Vermouth's message with a quick glance, pocketed his phone, and stopped paying attention to it. His thoughts were fixed on the bastard who had the nerve to try and steal his hard-won younger sister. He couldn't afford to waste energy on this cooperation now. The timing wasn't urgent anyway, but he needed to figure out who had given Shiashi the love letter. The next day at Haido Central Hospital, Shuichi Akai, Jody, and their superior James, unaware of the organization's internal maneuvers, walked down the corridor toward the ward where Kier was being treated. When the FBI captured Kier, an altercation had left her injured and unconscious, and she was receiving care at Haido Central. The hospital director owed James a favor and had arranged a private ward, concealing her records. "We didn't destroy the eavesdropping device in Gin's hands yesterday," Jody said heavily as she followed Shuichi. "If they can pull a usable fingerprint from it, we're in trouble." "Yes," James agreed with a frown. "I've already arranged for people to protect Detective Mori's family while this is sorted. Let's just hope it's not worse than we fear." "Let's hope so," Shuichi said quietly as he walked ahead without looking back. 165. Brother and sister meet. What we can do now is wake Kier as soon as possible and try to get more information about the organization from her, Shuichi Akai said quietly as he opened the hospital room door and looked down at Kier, who lay still on the bed. Jody and James followed him in and stepped to the bedside. James frowned when he saw Kier unconscious. "She's out of immediate danger, but she still hasn't regained consciousness. I don't know when she'll wake up." "We can only wait," Jody replied, then turned to James. "Do you think the hospital director can do anything more to rouse her?" James sighed. "He's done everything he can. He said we basically have to wait for Kier to wake up on her own. There isn't much else they can do." Then he remembered something and paused. "He did tell me they're about to bring in a doctor they recruited at great effort. According to him, this doctor is exceptional. He supposedly once woke a patient who'd been in a coma for years." James glanced at the wound on Kier's head. "If Kier remains unconscious for a long time, maybe we can ask that doctor to take a look." "That's our only option," Shuichi agreed. "But if she stays out for too long, the TV station won't just let things go without asking." Jody walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Down below, Conan crouched near the building, using his voice changer to impersonate Mizunashi Rena while requesting a leave of absence. She smiled a little. "It's fine. That child will handle it." Shuichi and James came to the window to watch. Shuichi's expression hardened as he studied the boy who didn't behave like a child. "That kid again. Who is he?" "A detective, probably," Jody said. "And the girls who hang around him are competent." She thought of Ran Mori and others. Shuichi nodded. He'd remembered the smart, precocious behavior on the bus. He really is clever, almost like a little Sherlock Holmes. James recalled the night he'd run into Conan and the kids as well. He even suggested measures to protect Kogoro and the others this time, he said. "So you only come to see me to ask about something so trivial?" "Bro, there?" Shashi pronounced the last syllable with a deliberate pause, her tone edged with mock menace. Cointreau, disguised as Morikawa Shiro and using the name Ether, waved his hands frantically. "Of course not," he said, sounding a little panicked. He had a feeling admitting the real reason would not end well. Before Shiashi could get angrier, Ether brought up the news he'd received from Vermouth, pretending it was the main reason he'd come and that the love letter was only incidental. They sat together at a small table tucked inside the cafe, surrounded by plants that made them easy to miss. "I'm worried about you. You're still young. Men can be very cunning," Ether said softly, peering at his sister with a look of genuine concern, as if she were already the victim of some schemer. Shiashi's mouth twitched. "You're a man too, so you're insulting yourself," she said. "But I don't even know who sent that letter. Why are you so worked up?" Despite not understanding his intense interest, Shiashi stored the details he'd mentioned to pass along to Ningguang later. One detail in particular mattered. Curaçao apparently has a short-term instantaneous memory ability. Ningguang and the others would need to be careful not to let her see anything she shouldn't. Ether relaxed a little. "So you don't know yet. Good." He couldn't completely calm down. Shiashi might take the letter seriously if she learned who sent it. What did the letter say? Did it ask for a reply? The waiter set down the tiramisu they'd ordered. The sight of their favorite dessert brightened Shishi's face. The letter receded further from her thoughts. She took a bite, then swallowed and frowned. Nothing bad, she said slowly. Cheesy lines, some grammatical mistakes, just awkward. Aether put down his spoon, watching her closely. Did it ask you out? Shishi nodded. It invited me to the restaurant on the second floor of the Baca Hotel tomorrow. Said he had something to say in person. You're not actually planning to go, are you? Aether's expression soured. I was thinking about it, Shiashi admitted, finishing the last of her tiramisu and finally noticing how reluctant her brother looked. She offered a small reassurance. Some things are best settled face to face. Better be, Aether muttered. He didn't press her further. He'd already decided to go to Baca tomorrow. If someone had the nerve to send a love letter to Shiashi, he intended to find out who that man was. 166. Morikawa Shiro reappears. Aether rarely got to see his little sister. He'd asked Shiashi out on impulse, but he was genuinely happy to catch up. After they grazed the awkward subject of love letters, they swapped updates about their lives. Then Aether handed Shiashi a card. I've saved a little over the years. This is part of it. You said you're building a base and could use the money. Take it for now. If it's not enough, tell your big brother. He paused, winked, and when Shiashi was still staring at the card in her hand, ruffled her hair. Don't be shy. I didn't have to work hard for this cash, and I don't have many expenses. It'd just sit around otherwise. Shiashi clutched the card and looked at him, touched. The resentment from his long absence softened. Having an older brother was a blessing. She nodded enthusiastically. Not wanting to end the day so soon, they finished their dessert, left the cafe, and Aether took her to Baca Park. They strolled, enjoyed the scenery, and took lots of photos. When Shiashi spotted a sculpture up ahead she wanted more pictures with, she hurried forward, only to notice two people crouched beside the sculpture's flower bed. She walked up behind them, curious. Sonoko, Conan, what are you doing? Startled, the two who'd been peering toward the sculpture spun around. Shishi! You scared me, Sonoko whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. She grabbed Shiashi's hand and signaled her to crouch. Sonoko was so nervous she didn't realize Shiashi wasn't alone. Aether stood a short distance behind them, watching with interest. Conan, meanwhile, was focused on Ran, who stood by the sculpture as if waiting for someone, and hadn't looked back. Assured Ran hadn't noticed, Sonoko and Conan relaxed. Shiashi knelt between them, intrigued. Okay, now what are you two doing? Aren't you going to say hi to Ran? After Sonoko's hushed explanation, Shiashi caught on. So Ran got a letter too, and she's waiting for whoever sent it? She shot Sonoko a sideways look. You're such a gossip, sneaking out here to watch. If Ran knew, she'd die of embarrassment. And Sonoko's one thing, but Conan, you're a kid. Why so curious? Didn't we say curiosity isn't good for little boys? Shiashi scolded, ruffling Conan's hair hard in mock discipline. Exactly. He's far too precocious, Sonoko agreed, but then froze, eyes bright. She turned to Shiashi, breathless with excitement. By the way, did you just say also? You got a letter too. Who sent it? What does he look like? Is he handsome? The rapid-fire questions made Shiashi dizzy. Sonoko still had her hand clamped on Shiashi's. Conan, realizing resistance was futile, let her muss his hair. Before Shiashi could protest, Sonoko grabbed her hand tighter. Even Conan admired Sonoko's radar for romance. She'd caught the little slip of also that no one else had noticed. Conan couldn't imagine who would fall for Shiashi. She didn't exactly look harmless. Did the sender know she could kick a thug halfway across the street? Let's hope he meant well, he thought. Shh, quiet. Someone's coming to Ran. Footsteps approached. At the warning, Sonoko and Conan dropped the interrogation and peered toward Ran. Shiashi couldn't help leaning out too. Ran Mori stood by the sculpture, glancing at her watch. A short-haired girl wearing glasses ran up, handed Ran a bouquet, and dashed off. So it wasn't a love letter after all, Sonoko sighed, then brightened. Just a fan note from her karate club. To Sonoko, a fan's admiration was even better than a secret admirer. Right, Ran's amazing. Of course she has fans, Shiashi smiled. After the girl left, Sonoko and Conan stepped out from behind the flower bed toward Ran, Shiashi following. Aether, who'd stayed back to give his sister space, walked over with them. So it wasn't some cute first-year underclassman, Sonoko teased. Sonoko and Conan, oh, even Shiashi, Rand said, half exasperated. Conan and Shiashi grinned. Ah, I was hoping for some juicy drama, Sonoko pretended to pout. What a shame, Rand replied, laughing lightly. Then she froze, eyes widening as she caught sight of someone behind the group. Mr. Morikawa, what are you doing here? Mufon 167, well-behaved little brother, Morikawa Shiro. Hearing the name made Conan's heart skip a beat. He whipped his head around, and there he was. It really was the man he had just thought of, Cointro, a code-name member of the organization. How had he appeared out of nowhere? Had he been behind them the whole time? What had he heard? Why had he sought them out? What was his relationship with Vermouth? Was Morikawa Shiro even his real name? Questions crowded Conan's mind, but one question pressed hardest. Had Cointro discovered the fingerprints on the bug planted in Kyr's shoe? Stiff as a board, Conan watched Cointro walk slowly up to Rand's side. He wanted to warn Rand to stay away from this dangerous man, but he couldn't bring himself to make a sound. Cointro glanced at the child beside Conan, and raised an eyebrow with a faint, amused expression. Why such a big reaction now? The boy hadn't looked so frightened at the harbor. He had even had the nerve to threaten Vermouth. Was it because of Miss Muri? Cointro turned his attention to Rand, thoughtful. Ah, Morikawa came with me just now. Sorry, I forgot for a moment. Shiasi, who'd been deep in conversation with Sonoko, shot a quick, apologetic look at Cointro. She'd been so focused on gossip that she hadn't noticed him trailing behind. Conan's surprise thudded through him. Why hadn't Shiashi mentioned she was still in contact with Morikawa Shiro? He couldn't remember her ever bringing him up before. It's fine, Cointro said lightly. Seeing his sister chatting happily with a friend seemed to put him in a good mood. He then greeted Sonoko formally. Miss Suzuki. And you, little brother, we meet again. His smile widened slightly as he looked down at Conan. Hello. Conan was frozen, every muscle locked. He watched Cointro like a hawk, tracking his posture, his expression. What exactly did Cointro want? Sonoko, who had just noticed Cointro, brightened. Whoa! He's a hottie! She elbowed Shiashi and whispered, Is he the one who sent you that love letter? Are you two on a date? Of course not. Shiashi denied it flatly. She introduced Cointro and Sonoko and briefly explained what had happened at Twilight Mansion. We just happened to run into each other today and started talking. It felt like fate, she said. Shiashi and Cointro had decided on a story beforehand. If they ran into anyone who might ask, they'd say they were friends. Given everything, Cointro would probably find reasons to see Shiashi again anyway. Neither of them wanted to keep meeting in secret forever. Saying they were friends would have to do. Even if Conan found out, there wasn't much he could do. He certainly wouldn't tell Shiashi about the organization, so he had no reason to forbid her from seeing this friend. So that's how it is. Sonoko sounded a little disappointed, but stopped trying to play matchmaker. Cointro gave Sonoko a polite nod, then glanced down at Conan with that same small smile. And you, little brother, we meet again. By the way, Sonoko, did you say love letter? Shishi got a love letter too? Rand chimed in. Girls were sensitive to such things. Rand had noticed when Sonoko had mentioned the letter earlier, but hadn't found the moment to ask. Now she jumped right in. You haven't told us the whole story yet. Under Sonoko and Rand's curiosity, Shiashi explained the love letter briefly. Sonoko's eyes lit up. Wow, maybe it's a romantic surprise for you, Shishi, she gushed, clasping her hands. Not necessarily, Shishi said. The guy didn't even write it seriously. He clearly wasn't serious about me. Conan shot Sonoko a look. Despite Cointro standing nearby, he couldn't help worrying after hearing Shishi's description of the letter. Shishi, if you're going tomorrow, you shouldn't go alone. Conan's brain had obviously scrambled under the pressure of Cointro's presence. He was treating Shiashi like any ordinary girl. Still, even if he knew better, he'd have said the same. Some dangers couldn't be handled by fighting skill alone. Yeah, this little brother's right. That guy might have bad intentions. Cointro's hand came down lightly on Conan's head in a casual, almost affectionate stroke. Conan didn't take it as praise. His spine stiffened under the pressure, feeling less like an accolade and more like a warning. He couldn't move. He just froze as Cointro ruffled his hair. Seeing Conan so submissive, so unlike his usual restless, protesting self, Sonoko muttered with curiosity but didn't dwell on it. Xiaxi's safety was the real priority. Then Xiaxi, how about I go with you? Sonoko volunteered, too eager for her excitement to be subtle. Sure. Xiaxi shrugged. She didn't much mind. If Sonoko wanted to come along, so be it. Even if whoever had written the letter had bad intentions, there shouldn't be any real danger with company. Cointreau, pretending to be concerned, also offered to accompany them, claiming he was worried two girls might be at a disadvantage. Before long, the group grew. Xiaxi, Sonoko, Cointreau, Ran, and Conan. They talked a little longer. Conan watched with clenched nerves as Cointreau subtly probed Ran for information. He could do nothing but worry. It was getting late. Cointreau had stayed longer than usual and finally took his leave. He walked to the parking lot and paused by his car, his hand on the door handle. He smiled down and then, almost as an afterthought, lowered his hand and looked behind him. You've been following me for so long, he said softly, stretching the words out in a sing-song tone. Is there something you need, little brother? For a moment, the world seemed to hush. Cointreau remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed in one direction, as if to say plainly, I know you're there. 168. More and more people know about it. Feeling Cointreau's gaze shift his way, Conan realized he'd been spotted and stepped out helplessly. He met Cointreau's eyes with a solemn expression. For a long moment, they stared at each other in silence, as if whoever spoke first would lose. Conan couldn't hold out. He had come up with an excuse to leave Rand's side to question Cointreau urgently. He couldn't waste any more time. You're Cointreau, right? Conan got straight to the point. It seems you overheard quite a bit from that bug the other day. Cointreau didn't answer directly, but his words were admission enough. How did you know the bug was mine? The fingerprints. Conan's face shifted. At first, it was only a guess. Now I'm sure. Cointreau raised an eyebrow. He'd been reasonably certain the device was Conan's, but he hadn't expected Conan to confirm it so easily. He let the sentence trail off, watching the boy's hand clench before he continued, deliberately. The fingerprint comparison came back a long time ago. The results were unexpected. The prints on the bug actually belonged to someone the organization has already declared dead. Shinichi Kudo. Cointreau fixed his gaze on the child and spoke the name slowly. Watching Conan go pale, he showed no pity and went on, and the person who signed the confirmation of Shinichi Kudo's death was Sherry. Unluckily for her, she's another who disappeared and defected from the organization. He tilted his head with feigned curiosity. So Conan, do you think there's some connection between the two of them? What are you talking about? I don't understand. Conan put on a befuddled look. He didn't know how much Vermouth had told Cointreau or how much Cointreau had discovered on his own. Worried he might blurt something out again, he played dumb. If you don't know, you don't know. Cointreau made a small concession. I've covered up the fingerprint matter for you, so the FBI watching around you can stand down. That would spare Xiaxi from constantly complaining about feeling uncomfortable being watched whenever she was with Ran lately. Glancing up at the sky, Cointreau decided there was no need to say more. He turned, opened the car door, and slid in, preparing to head back to base. As the car passed Conan, Cointreau looked at the boy who had stepped back a few paces. After a moment's thought, he said, Thank Vermouth. She paid a price for me to keep this quiet. I hope you're as lucky next time. Cointreau drove off after that last remark. Conan lowered the transmitter in his hand with a twinge of regret. He'd planned to find a way to plant it on Cointreau's car. Maybe he could have traced the organization's base. But after that warning and the sharp intuition Cointreau had shown in their recent encounters, Conan abandoned the dangerous idea. Still, Cointreau's words made him think. Vermouth had asked Cointreau for help, both this time and in that incident at the harbor, and neither seemed intent on harming him or Ran. Why? Was there some special connection between them? Back at the base, Cointreau ran into Jin, who was in an obvious bad mood. Cointreau guessed some mission had failed, but Jin's ire was aimed at him. Cointreau. Jin's voice was low and dangerous. He was furious that Cointreau had been out of contact for nearly a day. Cointreau gave a casual excuse. I didn't bring my phone. I left it at the safe house. Nothing much usually happens, so I was too lazy to go back for it. In truth, Xiaxi had taken the phone to have Noah's Ark and Nahida install security systems and software on it. Cointreau had agreed to collect it the next day, so he truly didn't have a phone on him and used that as his explanation for not replying. Jin studied him for a few moments. It better be. He said no more, only scowling as he started to walk past. Cointreau watched him go, then called after him. I'll be tied up tomorrow too, but don't worry, I won't be out of contact, and don't contact me unless it's urgent. He walked off before Jin could answer. Jin stopped abruptly, looking back at Cointreau with murderous intent. Vodka stood behind him, trembling, his hand drifting toward his gun before he restrained himself. Baca Hotel. Kaya sat on a sofa with a glass of dandelion wine, savoring it slowly. You say the traveler received a love letter recently? And that cheap older brother knows too? Kaya and Al-Haytham had a special secure link to exchange information. In their spare moments, they traded snippets, and the topic had drifted to the traveler. Kaya had learned the tidbit from Al-Haytham and couldn't help smiling at the prospect of some drama. He prodded for more, but Al-Haytham didn't know much and wasn't inclined to pry. After disconnecting, Kaya phoned Noelle, who was helping out at the restaurant beneath the traveler's residence. She would know what was going on. A while later, satisfied, Kaya set the phone down and went to Klee, who was unusually quiet with a storybook. He ruffled her hair. Klee, we haven't seen the traveler much lately. Do you miss her? Klee misses big sister Xiaxi. Is big brother Kaya going to take Klee to play with her? Klee looked up bright-eyed, then lowered her head to count friends on her fingers. There's Ayumi and Mitsuhiko and the others. I haven't seen them in a long time. When will big brother Kaya take me to play with them? Then you should get to bed early tonight. You'll see big sister Xiaxi tomorrow. She's coming over to see you. Kaya smiled. Klee had been staying up late with her books, and Kaya had been trying to give her a reason to go to bed earlier. He hoped the promise of a visit from the traveler would do the trick. As for your other friends, Klee, big brother Kaya promises that if you go to bed on time for the next few days, I'll take you to see whoever you want. For Klee, the chance to meet the traveler and her friends was more tempting than any storybook. She hesitated a moment over the book in her hands, but the thought of seeing the traveler tomorrow made her put it down. The next day, Kaya brought Klee to the place Noelle had mentioned. At the door, he noticed a steady stream of people coming and going. Through the open doorway, he could see staff fussing over decorations, roses, balloons, the whole show. It looked like a proposal setup, gaudy, old-fashioned, and dripping with money. Kaya's curiosity about how the traveler would react only grew. A tall man emerged from the room. His hair was long and braided, dyed a distinctive smoky gray. He wore a black jacket trimmed with tassels. His eyes were half-lidded, his limbs loose and unhurried, giving an impression of a careless dandy. He walked while talking on his phone, glancing past Kaya without much interest. He moved to the window, smiling as he spoke. Even from a distance, Kaya caught bits of the conversation. The man was Takano Hideki, a playboy, a second-generation heir whose family ran hotels, one of which was the Baca Hotel. As the younger son, he wasn't expected to take over the family business, and that freedom had made him indulgent and rebellious, but not without some sense of decency. He never dated two people at once. On the phone, he was describing the plan for today. How are the preparations? And who's the target this time? It's rare to see you go all out from the start, the voice asked. It's all set. Don't worry. Once I win her over, I'll bring her around to meet you, Takano answered confidently. The idea that Xiaxi might refuse him hadn't even occurred to him. This one's different. I think I might have met my true love. He brightened as he spoke. He told of a day when he'd been in danger, surrounded by a group ready to do him harm, when a sharp shout scattered the attackers. Someone had descended as if from the sky and stood between him and the thugs. For an instant, he'd thought he'd seen an angel. She left in a hurry before he could learn her name. He'd tracked down her address and come prepared with a love letter to soften the blow of a sudden confession. There was, of course, one hitch. Takano hadn't known how to write a love letter. Staring at the stationery, he'd gone blank, so he had one of his followers draft it for him. That follower had barely taken it seriously, copied bits off the internet, patched a few lines together, and handed it over. That was why Shishi had felt the letter was odd and full of mistakes. Takano, however, thought it was beautifully written and sent it anyway. He planned to declare his feelings in front of everyone here and sweep her off her feet. Kaya listened, his expression folding into something like pity. With Takano's arrogant certainty, Kaya imagined the scene would be less a triumph and more a humiliation. Inviting friends to witness the moment only raised the stakes. If things went badly, embarrassment would be amplified. Takano finished the call and, noticing people nearby, frowned. Who would show up at a time like this? He was impatient. Then he saw the dark-clothed man step closer. Kaya walked up and exchanged a few words with him. With the right tone, Kaya got Takano to agree to let him watch the confession. Takano, slightly dizzy with his own self-assurance, led Kaya and the little girl inside. Before leaving, Takano saw how cute the child was. He reached out and patted Klee's head with the casual affection of someone used to touching other people's things. Then he called out loudly, "Nakamura! Nakamura, where are you?" Nakamura Masato hurried over, dropping whatever he had been doing. "Is everything ready? Don't mess this up or I'll—" Takano snapped, dissatisfied that Nakamura had been out of sight at such a critical moment. Nakamura lowered his head and nodded like a man who'd been scolded one time too many. Takano waved him off and Nakamura slipped away, but not back to the obvious tasks. He paused just out of Takano's sight and watched his employer with a dark gaze and clenched fists. Kaya, standing behind him, noticed the tension in Nakamura's hands and felt a prickle of interest. Things were about to get more complicated than a simple, showy confession. After a moment, Nakamura straightened, took a final look at Takano, and left. 170. Confession. Ether had left over an hour early to find Shiashi, retrieve the doctored phone, talk for a while, and then meet Ron and the others at the Muri Detective Agency before they all headed to the Baika Hotel together. By the time they set off, the group had gained one more traveler, Noel, whom Lisa and Shangling had persuaded Shiashi to bring along for safety. Conan hung back about half a step, watching Cointro's back as the man walked beside Shiashi, chatting with her and ran about the latest celebrities and TV shows. Cointro's expression was gentle and patient, no hint of impatience at all. Conan could tell the conversation had left a very favorable impression. They'd already let him call them by their first names. Conan pressed his lips together and shot Cointro a glare. What a sly fox. Why would a member of the organization deliberately cozy up to Shiashi? He'd also noticed that Cointro paid much more attention to Shiashi than to him. Had the man, after discovering how often people from that mysterious group contacted her, assumed the identity of Morikawa Shiro just to shadow her more easily? Conan worried the man's presence today might signal some special plan. Still, after yesterday's call to the FBI, Mr. Akai, who had once infiltrated the organization, had promised to make early preparations, and that eased Conan a little. Noel noticed the child lagging and came back to take his hand, determined not to lose him. Conan squirmed at being treated like a clueless kid. He tried to pull away, failed, and resigned himself to it. At the hotel, a staff member quickly recognized Shiashi. She paused when she saw the extra faces, gathered herself, and led them up to the second floor. She stopped outside one room and gestured for Shiashi to open the door. Shiashi stared at it, her expression odd. According to the letter, this was supposed to be an ordinary confession, so why did it feel like a marriage proposal? Sonoko leaned toward Ran and whispered, "Ran, doesn't this confession feel totally different from yours yesterday? Why all the mystery? You don't think there's any real danger, do you?" "Surely not," Ran said, uneasy at the thought, "but with so many of us here, it should be fine." "True," Sonoko relaxed. Seeing Shishi still frozen in place, she stepped closer. "Shishi, aren't you going to open it?" Shiashi hesitated. She was certain she wouldn't like whatever waited inside. "Let me." Cointro moved forward and stepped in front of her. For safety, in uncertain situations, a man should go first. He smiled at them, reached for the handle, and pushed. Pop, pop, pop. A string of party poppers exploded, showering Cointro with confetti that clung to his hair and clothes, impossible to get off quickly. The staff inside the room, seeing a man enter, exchanged stunned looks. Had the wrong person walked in, or had the young master's tastes changed? But the invitation's protagonist had been described as a golden-eyed blonde girl. Wait, the man in front of them had golden hair too. Could it be? The doorway fell silent until Cointreau stepped aside and let the young women behind him enter. Among them was indeed a girl with golden hair and eyes. Everyone exhaled in relief. They'd simply mistaken the person. Shashi watched her brother's bedraggled state and secretly rejoiced she hadn't opened the door herself. She felt suddenly that agreeing to give an answer in person had been a mistake. Who knew what other surprises might be waiting? Hearing the commotion, Takano Hideki knew his awaited guest had arrived. He straightened his clothes, took a bouquet of roses from Nakamura, lifted a proud, confident smile, and moved toward the entrance with his retinue. Though surprised by the extra people, he still picked out his beloved at a glance, swept back his long hair, and with deliberate elegance stepped up to Shiashi to offer the roses. "Ah! It's you, the Takano family's idiot second son," a surprised female voice blurted. Annoyed, Takano looked for the interrupter. "You? Suzuki's boy-crazy second daughter." Conan, squeezed aside by the crowd, thought, their opinions of each other match perfectly. He surveyed the sea of flowers and balloons and worried things might get hard to manage. A black figure flashed past his peripheral vision. Kea. Why was he here? Too many people blocked Conan's view. He didn't notice Klee beside Kea. Sonoko and Takano Hideki recognized each other from an earlier banquet where they'd clashed, and Takano couldn't resist trading a few barbed remarks. Nakamura's quick reminder kept him from starting a scene. Ignoring the Suzuki girl, Takano extended the bouquet again, cleared his throat, and gazed soulfully at Shiashi. "Beautiful angel," he announced. "I must tell you, my heart has fallen deeply in love with you. You are the most beautiful accident of my life." Takano Hideki said to Shiashi in a syrupy tone, "Beautiful angel, my heart has fallen hopelessly for you. You are the most wonderful accident in my life. Take these flowers and be my girlfriend. I promise you'll be the one I love above all others. Don't worry, I'll treat you well and give you plenty of money. You can tell me anything. You don't have to struggle as a detective to make ends meet anymore. I can support you." Paimon popped up, unable to help herself. "Traveler, this is the first time I've seen someone confess to you, but for some reason, everything he said just sounded annoying. Isn't a confession supposed to make someone happy? Yesterday, I saw Ran was pretty happy when someone confessed to her." Paimon's voice was baffled. Shiashi clenched her fists, forcing down the anger Takano's words had stirred. He genuinely thought he was doing her a favor. Shiashi could see that in his eyes. Narcissistic, yes, but sincere. It was a special talent, though, to make a confession sound so infuriating. If he kept going, she worried she might physically make him stop. Conan and Ran were tense, too. They watched Shiashi's face change slowly into a cold smile and glanced at each other, worried she might lose control, and that a scuffle could end disastrously. Ether sensed the shift and stepped closer to Shiashi. Then, in the next instant, Shiashi acted. She flicked her leg and kicked Takano Hideki. For a moment, Conan thought she'd finally snapped and meant to attack. But he was wrong. With a loud crash, a tall Christmas tree that had been standing as a decoration beside Takano toppled over to where he had been standing. If Shiashi hadn't kicked him, he would have been crushed beneath it, dead or seriously injured. Which made one wonder why there was a Christmas tree set up months before the holiday. Ran and Sonoko rushed to Takano's side and helped him up. "Mr. Takano, are you all right?" I'm fine." "Ah, my chest. No, maybe I'm not entirely fine." He tried to sound tough, but the kick had landed hard on his ribs and it hurt. He couldn't deny the pain. He also knew he couldn't blame Shiashi. Her kick had saved his life. This was the second time she'd rescued him. The grateful look in his eyes made him even more convinced they were fated to be together. Shiashi felt a chill. Did her kick knock some sense into his head? She'd only increased her strength slightly, out of anger, and she'd missed his head, so he should be okay medically. Ether's smile faded. He turned slightly to block Takano's view. The police arrived. "Ran, Conan and Shiashi, we meet again." Inspector Megure greeted them with his usual half-closed eyes. A policeman behind him nodded toward Shiashi. "Miss Natsume, finally somewhere other than a bombing scene." Matsuda Jinpei removed his sunglasses, tucked them into his breast pocket, and gave Shiashi a wink. Then he looked to the man beside her and asked, "Who's this? A new friend of yours?" Something about the man's build struck Matsuda as familiar. If the face had been the same, he would have been sure it was the person who had saved him before. But the face wasn't the same. It could have been a coincidence. Curious, he reached out and shook the man's hand. "Mr. Morikawa, you look familiar. Have we met before?" "Probably not," the man answered calmly. "I only just returned from abroad. If I'd met Officer Matsuda recently, I'd remember." Aether, giving his name as Morikawa, didn't react much to the question, which sounded a little like a flirtatious pickup line. Matsuda seemed satisfied and turned to join Inspector Megure, ready to begin the investigation. Conan had already moved ahead with Megure. Beside him, Aether murmured low enough for only Shiashi to hear, "That officer is sharp. Were you glad you saved him back then?" Shiashi asked, glancing at Matsuda as he inspected the scene. "A little," Aether said. "It felt like making up for something from the past." She admitted she'd been confused and shocked about the whole episode, but she had been, if only a bit, relieved to learn Matsuda was alive. "So I don't regret it," she added, and Aether smiled gently at her. Inspector Megure's voice carried over. "So there are 4 suspects this time." He sounded unsure. The number didn't sit right with him. Usually, these things narrowed down differently. The 4 were Nakamura Masato, Takano Hideki's follower. He arranged the venue and decided the tree's placement. He also did its decorations. Inoue Jin, a friend of Takano's who was invited to the confession. He'd accidentally knocked off a decoration while passing and lingered for a while. Keiya, a new acquaintance of Takano's who showed up with a child. The child liked the tree's shape, so Keiya stood by it to admire it. Akai, a temporary hotel worker that day, responsible for moving the tree into place. Megure sighed. "It was just a confession. Why make such a scene?" Conan's mouth twitched when he heard the list. Mr. Akai, that was the man who had told him not to worry yesterday. And yet Mr. Akai had come to the scene himself today. He probably hadn't come alone. Someone else could have been monitoring things. He was surprised Keiya was even a suspect, and he hadn't expected Akai to be on the list either. If Akai wouldn't do something like this, and Keiya had no motive, then the choice narrowed down to the other 2, Nakamura Masato or Inoue Jin. 172. Shuichi Akai's suspicion. Shiashi stared in surprise at Keiya. He shouldn't have been here. Now he was a suspect in the accident, and she couldn't help but roll her eyes. Honestly, he had to involve himself in every bit of excitement. Of course, now he was a suspect. "All right, now tell me about your relationship with the victim." Inspector Megure, oblivious to the looks being exchanged around him, followed procedure and continued questioning the suspects. Of the 4 people here, aside from Keiya and Shuichi Akai, who had only met Mr. Takano today, the other 2 had known Takano Hideki for years. "Officer, I came because I heard Mr. Takano was going to confess to my friend, so I came to watch the show." Keiya clasped Klee's hand with one of his own and gave a helpless smile at how things had turned out. "Shia. He said he'd come to watch, right to my face. Keiya, just you wait." Shuichi Akai glanced sideways, thinking, a confession to a friend, so Keiya's friend must be that mysterious girl. Was his sudden appearance really that simple, unconnected to the organization? And that little girl he was holding, Klee, made the scene look strange. When Shuichi first saw Keiya at the hotel, he had suspected a connection to Cointreau, but seeing the child Keiya had with him suggested otherwise. Akai's target today was Cointreau. Given an earlier warning, though someone else had acted on it, Shuichi instinctively felt Keiya was not someone to be taken lightly. As long as Keiya didn't interfere with their operation, he planned to ignore him. He hadn't expected an accident to happen before the FBI agents could get into position. With so many police present now, it was no longer convenient to take action. Shuichi sent a brief message to his superior, James, asking him to initiate Plan B. Besides, Keiya continued, holding the child's hand up as if to prove a point, "I only arrived a short while ago. There wasn't time to set any of this up, and I've been with Klee the whole time. Could I possibly do something like this in front of a child?" You have a point," Inspector Megure nodded. Other testimonies supported Keiya's claim. He had lacked the opportunity to commit the crime, so his suspicion was largely dismissed. Conan agreed. He hadn't believed Keiya was responsible from the start. That left only 3 suspects. Inspector Megure felt somewhat relieved that this was the usual state of affairs. I only arrived a short while ago, Shuichi added immediately after Kaya, clarifying his own position. I was just following instructions to transport this tree, and I only met Mr. Tano today. That's not necessarily true. Kaya shot Shuichi a meaningful glance, then turned back to Inspector Megure with a smile. I heard Mr. Takano was scolding this Mr. Akai earlier, said he'd dock his pay. He kept fanning the flames. And Inspector, this Mr. Akai looks so fierce. He doesn't give the impression of being a nice person. Maybe he did something on impulse in a fit of rage. Don't just speculate when you're giving clues, Officer Matsuda Jinpei interrupted, frowning at Kaya's attempt to smear someone else. His mouth twitched. Did Kaya ever look in a mirror before saying things like that? Compared to Akai, Matsuda thought he himself seemed even less wholesome. Still, Matsuda admitted to himself that Akai carried an unusual aura. Whether he was a good person would depend on the investigation. Docking pay? What's that about? Inspector Megure seized on the detail and looked up at Shuichi with a searching expression. Kaya's words had clearly raised suspicion. Seeing Megure and Officer Matsuda glancing at Akai, Conan felt a jolt of anxiety. Surely Kaya wasn't trying to frame him? Trying to meet Shuichi's calm, stay composed look, Conan took a deep breath and forced himself to think about clues instead of reacting. It's because Takano thought this man might steal his thunder, so he made up an excuse to teach him a lesson, Nakamura Masato volunteered, eager to deflect suspicion from himself. This tree was supposed to be moved by 2 people, but Takano made him do it alone to make things difficult. So he must have held a grudge against Takano because of it, and that's why he wanted to harm him. Nakamura conveniently pinned the motive on Shuichi. Takano Hideki, who had been listening from the side, processed this and immediately pointed at Shuichi. Aha, I knew it. You're the culprit. You don't look like a good person at all. Nakamura's right. You must have a grudge against me. Takano couldn't believe his friends or subordinates had done this. There'd been no conflict, and harming him wouldn't have benefited any of them. The only remaining suspect was the man he disliked from the start. Of course, it had to be him. Officer, arrest him. He's definitely the culpano cried, turning to Inspector Megure. He muttered under his breath as he spoke. Honestly, it's all his fault for ruining my confession scene. Otherwise, my angel would have said yes. Sonoko, nearby, heard him and rolled her eyes. He hadn't been reading the room at all. Did Shishi look like she was about to accept a confession at that moment? But she decided not to chide Takano. He meant no real harm, and letting him blunder a little might teach him a lesson. Conan watched, dumbfounded, as the suspects and the victim practically conspired to convict Shuichi Akai. It took considerable persuasion from Inspector Megure before Takano grudgingly accepted that Akai was only a suspect and not a proven perpetrator. From the look on Takano's face, he clearly still believed Akai guilty. He was only holding back for appearances. Wiping sweat from his brow, Inspector Megure thought to himself that even though no one had died this time, the case was somehow more troublesome than previous murder scenes. Fortunately, Kaya had only meant to cause Shuichi Akai a little trouble. He hadn't intended anything serious. With Conan's help, Inspector Megure and the others soon found the culprit. Nakamura, why did you do this? Haven't I treated you well? Takano Hideki cried, pointing in disbelief at Nakamura Makoto. Cornered, Nakamura stopped struggling and glared at Takano, resentment blazing in his eyes. Treated me well? You only ever used me as a lackey, summoned me when you needed me, tossed me aside when you didn't. You treated me like a servant and call that kindness. His voice rose until he was shouting. It was clear these grievances had been simmering for a long time. Takano stammered, stunned. Then you could have refused. Then, as if remembering something, he straightened and sneered. Besides, if I weren't funneling benefits to your family's company, where would you get all that spending money? And you dare say I treated you badly? Humph, ungrateful wretch. So your filthy cash gives you the right to trample my dignity? Nakamura snapped, unable to see any kindness in Takano's actions. An officer stepped forward to escort Nakamura back to the station for questioning. The sudden movement snapped something in the already unstable man. He yanked out a pistol and trained it on the officer. The officer raised his hands instantly to avoid provoking him. Nakamura kept the gun leveled to keep him back, then swept the weapon toward the others and ordered everyone to back off. Fearing he might fire, Inspector Megure and the rest complied, stepping back. Matsuda Jinpei quietly took an extra step and used the retreating crowd as cover to slip out of Nakamura's line of sight. Megure caught the maneuver from the corner of his eye and felt a small relief. He concentrated on holding Nakamura's attention. Conan, hidden in a blind spot, had the tranquilizer needle in his watch ready, waiting for the man's trigger finger to relax. Nakamura swung the gun toward Takano, then, amid shocked stares, suddenly redirected it at Shiashi. "It's all your fault," he raged, as if she had grievously wronged him. Shiashi blinked. "We only met today. What did I ever do to you? A loser like you only knows how to blame others," Aether said coldly, sizing up the reckless man. To him, anyone better than him is guilty just for breathing. Megure's pupils widened. He signaled frantically and silently at Aether to stop provoking the culprit. "Shut up! What do you know? You know nothing." Spurred by Aether's words, Nakamura jerked the pistol away, passing over Conan and Shuichi Akai's blank faces and aimed it at Cointreau. "It's her fault for ruining my plan. If not for her, I'd have succeeded long ago. None of this would have happened." From the rambling, the group realized Nakamura had tried this once before, the day Shiashi and Takano first met, and that attempt had been foiled as well, hence his accusation. "Then blame your rotten luck and sloppy planning, your own incompetence," Aether continued, merciless. Megure's signals grew more frantic. Pushed over the edge, Nakamura whipped the gun toward Aether, his finger tightening on the trigger. Seizing the moment, Matsuda lunged, grabbed Nakamura's wrist, and forced it upward to prevent a bystander's being hit. At the same instant, Conan's tranquilizer dart sank into Nakamura's neck. A sharp sting, vision blurring, the man's finger twitched involuntarily. Bang! Everyone flinched. One shot had gone off, but the bullet lodged in the ceiling chandelier. No one was hurt. Matsuda disarmed the collapsing Nakamura and stared as the man slumped unconscious. A white blur had flashed past him just before Nakamura went limp. Glancing aside, Matsuda caught Conan's bewildered gaze, hands innocently behind his back. Could that kid really have done something? With the culprit finally subdued, Takano's taut nerves eased. He spotted his angel chatting happily with the man beside her, and annoyed at the interruption, started forward to cut in and arrange the next time and place for his confession. He'd barely taken a few steps when an odd noise overhead froze him. The chandelier, clipped by the earlier bullet, wobbled and, snap, began to fall. Takano's body refused to move. He could only watch the massive fixture descend and briefly thought, "So Nakamura wins after all." Crash! Before the chandelier struck, someone slammed into him and hurled him clear. His rescuer twisted midair to cushion his fall and keep him from hitting the floor. Everything happened so fast that seconds passed before onlookers rushed over. "Mr. Takano, are you hurt?" Still dazed, Takano patted his face and looked up at his savior, a girl with soft gray, medium-length hair, her eyes full of calm concern. Once she was satisfied he was unhurt, Noelle returned to Shiashi's side. Takano continued to watch her, his gaze following her every step. Across the room, Shuichi Akai examined the scattered fragments of the chandelier, frowning. Not a shard had touched Takano or the girl who saved him. Mere coincidence? Conan noticed the oddity too, but dismissed it. He had seen the fixture fall, and given everything else that had happened, chalked it up to Takano and Noelle's phenomenal luck. "Hey, what are you staring at? And how exactly are you planning to confess to your angel?" Takano's friend relaxed once his suspicion cleared, and in a teasing mood, walked up behind Takano Hideki and gave him a hard slap on the back. The impact snapped Takano out of whatever reverie he'd been in. "I'm not going to confess," Takano said flatly. "No, I'm not going to confess to the angel." "Why not? Didn't you say she was your true love?" his friend asked, baffled by the sudden shift. "Because the angel's too distant. I don't think she'll ever belong to me. Compared to her, that night lady makes my heart race even more." He thought of the night lady who had saved him and taken care of him. His friend's lip twitched. Where had this night lady come from? Takano really hadn't changed, still falling for the next person he saw. Aether had noticed earlier that the slow-witted young master had shifted his attention. He thought the boy had terrible taste and reaffirmed that no man was worthy of anyone but their own sister. But at least he felt relieved that, despite today's chain of accidents, things had turned out acceptably. Aether was getting ready to leave. If he lingered, certain people would start to worry. Nearby, Conan had been watching Cointreau. After greeting Xiaxi and the others, Cointreau was preparing to leave. Conan moved to follow, but Shuichi Akai, in a quick, firm gesture, pressed down on Conan's shoulder, signaling that the FBI already had a plan and to leave the rest to them. Then Shuichi himself went after Cointreau. Conan watched them disappear into the crowd and felt a little better when he saw Kea still with Klee and Xiaxi. He hadn't left either. Shuichi, trailing the figure ahead, didn't bother to hide. He'd already been exposed. There was no point in hiding now. He expected Cointreau to notice and try to shake him, but Cointreau walked on as if unaware he was being followed, leisurely heading toward the elevator. Shuichi wasn't really worried about losing Cointreau. The FBI had personnel stationed nearby and snipers at the hotel entrance. They wouldn't lose him. Ideally, they could apprehend him today, just like with Kier. Even if they couldn't, they could still test more of his capabilities. When Cointreau stepped into the elevator, Shuichi delayed, watching. At the last second, as the doors began to close, he pressed the open button and slipped in. He gave a quick glance to the elevator panel. Only the top floor button was lit. Why head up? The lower floors had plenty of exits. From the second floor, even jumping out a window wouldn't have been dangerous for someone like Cointreau. Was someone waiting for him on the roof? Rai, no, I should call you Shuichi Akai. We meet again, Cointreau said first, with the same casual tone he always wore. Hello, Shuichi replied politely. There was no trace of the hostility they'd shown each other before. Their exchange was disarmingly normal. Should I call you Cointreau or Morikawa Shiro? That's the name I'm using now. Cointreau spoke the alias plainly, not surprised that Shuichi knew his code name. Hearing him confirm Morikawa Shiro was only a pseudonym left Shuichi momentarily speechless. He recovered and tilted his head in question. I thought you'd either attack me on sight or at least inform the organization, but you don't seem inclined to do either. While he spoke, Shuichi used the moment to type a message on his phone out of Cointreau's sight, instructing his colleagues to adjust their plan. Most agents had been positioned at the lower floor windows and hotel exits. They hadn't expected Cointreau to stay inside the building. They would have to redeploy. Cointreau shrugged, leaning back against the elevator wall. You betrayed the organization, not me. There's no advantage in being eager to round up traitors. He added offhandedly. By the way, your girlfriend is dead. You know that, right? Shuichi's expression sharpened. I know. Akemi was killed by Gin. I'll make Jin pay. Oh, then good luck to you, Cointreau said casually, then, after a beat, asked something that made Shuichi flinch. Did you know she was your cousin? Shuichi's eyes widened. He hadn't expected that question. If Cointreau knew, it probably meant it was true. Akemi his cousin? The revelation made everything feel unreal. If Akemi was his cousin, then her sister Sherry was his cousin too. How had Cointreau discovered something Shuichi didn't even know about himself? Had the organization already probed his background, or had Cointreau found out on his own? The man's logic was inscrutable. He held high rank, yet hid damaging information, had kept Calvados from being detained, destroyed an eavesdropping device, and now had exposed his own location. Was he truly unconcerned about his safety? Oh, Cointreau said, feigning realization. So you didn't know? Tsk, using even your own cousin. What a scumbag. He spat the words with open contempt. Shuichi's face stiffened, but he couldn't deny the uncomfortable truth. I didn't know at the time. Heh. Excuses, Cointreau cut him off, glancing sideways. If you'd known back then, would you have used her anyway? I would. Shuichi's voice was quiet but firm. Despite the guilt, despite everything, he knew what he had chosen then and knew he would choose it again. He might have handled things differently if he'd known the family tie, but the essential decision would be the same. There was still time before the elevator reached the top. Shuichi shifted the topic. Why have you shown up these past 2 days? What's your purpose? Cointreau gave a long, exaggerated sigh. No purpose. It was just a coincidence. Ran into someone I knew. Thought it would be interesting. Don't be so suspicious like Jin. The elevator chimed. They had reached the top floor. 175, jumping off a building. The elevator chimed and the doors slid open. Cointreau straightened, stepped out, and walked down the corridor with measured steps. He pushed open the rooftop door and went outside. Shuichi Akai followed in silence, watching his every move, all the while wondering what Cointreau was doing up here and how he expected to leave the hotel, surely not by helicopter. His phone buzzed, the snipers were in place, and extra men had been stationed on the top floor. Shuichi exhaled. So far the plan was on track. Still, Cointreau's calm, unhurried manner left a knot of unease in his gut. He paused, confirmed with a colleague that there was no ambush outside, then followed onto the roof. Cointreau stood on the ledge, red laser dots from sniper scopes steady on every vital point. Shuichi frowned. Cointreau, I don't know what you're planning, but you're out of options. Cooperate with us. From what I've seen, you're hardly loyal to the organization, are you? I refuse. The words slid off Cointreau's tongue the instant Shuichi finished. He genuinely felt no loyalty to the organization, but he also knew there was nowhere else for him, at least not until Natsuki reappeared. Agencies like the FBI, CIA, or Japanese public security, once they learned his secret, would be far more dangerous than the organization. The old man understood that perfectly. It was why he trusted one person so completely. Shuichi, however, had no idea what Cointreau had in mind. The refusal was expected, but its immediacy puzzled him. For freedom, I suppose, Cointreau said with a small curve to his mouth. Then, with no ceremony, he stepped back. His heels reached the very edge. He pushed off lightly, and in the span of Shuichi's widening eyes, tilted backward and dropped like a bird taking flight. From refusal to plunge took less than 2 seconds. Shuichi sprinted, but he was too late to grab him. He dashed to the edge and looked down, straight into the muzzle Cointreau had leveled. Instinctively, he arched backward to dodge. Bang! Nang! It happened so fast that, even though he reacted, the bullet still tore into his shoulder. Shuichi had considered every contingency, snipers, accomplices, but never that Cointreau would jump and manage to fire a shot midair. He had been completely unprepared. Shuichi staggered back, braced himself against the wall, pressed a hand to the wound, and gave a wry smile. Lately, his shoulder seemed determined to attract bullets. Footsteps came running. Jody and his superior, James, arrived seconds later. Shuichi, are you all right? Jody hurried over, worry written across her face as she checked him. I'm fine, nothing vital, he said, then looked at James. What happened after Cointreau jumped? Our snipers report he made no move, straight free fall until surrounding buildings blocked the view about 10 meters above ground, James replied, frowning. He had already sent teams to search for a body, but he didn't really believe Cointreau was dead. Suicide didn't fit the man they knew. Subconsciously, James was convinced Cointreau had slipped away again. Shuichi felt the same. They fell silent and waited for the search reports. One more thing. Dig up everything you can on 2 people, Akemi and Natsume Natsuki. Be thorough. Shuichi hesitated slightly when he said Akemi's name. Why them? Jody asked then, putting 2 and 2 together, asked, Did Cointreau say something? Yeah. Shuichi summarized what he'd learned. Cointreau treated that Natsuki woman differently. There was a connection, and she could be leverage. Jody regarded him with mixed feelings. She couldn't shake the thought that Shuichi had used his cousin's affection to infiltrate the organization and had indirectly caused her death. For a moment, she worried about the implications. Dating a cousin seemed odd, then reminded herself that cousin marriage was legal in Japan, and the unease eased. James nodded and cast a worried glance at Shuichi's shoulder. We'll talk more later. First, the hospital. Only Baika Central can keep a gunshot quiet, and the director there will help. The mention of the director brought another thought to James's face. The specialist you told me about is already at Baika Central, he added. He can treat you, and we'll see what he's capable of. Shuichi offered no objection. They cleared the rooftop, then left the Baika Hotel. 176. Atractylodes macrocephala. On the way to Baika Central Hospital, James took a call from a subordinate. He frowned, answered briefly, then hung up. News from the team at the scene? Shuichi Akai asked. Yeah, they didn't find Cointreau's body, and there's no sign anyone fell from that height, James said. How on earth did he pull it off? He really vanished. Jody murmured, stunned. An opponent you can't predict. Exactly the kind I expected, Shuichi replied, unperturbed. At Baker Central, they were in the room next to Kier's. Shuichi sat on the bed while James, Jody, and he went over the day's events. A knock came at the door. James opened it to find the hospital director and, a step behind him, another doctor in a white coat, the one the director had mentioned. The director made the introductions. The doctor's name was Baiju. He'd come from Country Z at the director's invitation. They had been friends for years, and the director had only just brought him to Japan. Judging him trustworthy, the director introduced him to the FBI. Baiju had warm, golden brown eyes, half-rimmed gold glasses, and long turquoise hair tied back in a ponytail that fell down his back. Even facing strangers, his smile was steady and genuinely comforting, the sort of presence that put patients at ease. Every movement was professional. "Good day," Baiju nodded, then glanced at Shuichi's shoulder with concern. "Mr. Akai's wound needs attention. I can take care of it, or if you'd prefer, the director can." "Please go ahead, Dr. Baiju," Shuichi said. No ceremony was necessary. Jody watched as Baiju began inserting needles into Shuichi's shoulder. "What's that?" she asked. "Acupuncture," Baiju said with a smile, reading her curiosity. "I assumed you dislike anesthesia, so I used acupuncture for analgesia. It won't affect your nerves and makes suturing easier." Shuichi felt the pain ebb almost immediately. "How did you know I don't like anesthetics?" he asked. The director wouldn't have revealed their identities without James's consent, and there was no rule against agents using anesthesia. Had Baiju guessed he was a sniper? Baiju paused, met Shuichi's gaze, smiled faintly, and resumed suturing. "I've treated thousands of people. After seeing so many bodies, I can often guess a person's work at a glance," he said modestly. "The calluses on your hands told me you handle guns, sniper rifles, specifically." "Sharp eye, Doctor," Shuichi acknowledged. They fell silent and watched as Baiju finished. He disinfected and bandaged the wound, then stepped back. "There was a slight reopening of an older injury, so I cleaned that up too. Eat lightly and try not to strain the shoulder. It's taken 2 hits in a row." Then he turned his attention elsewhere. "By the way, the patient the director mentioned earlier, is that not you?" The symptoms described had sounded like impact-related unconsciousness, not a bullet graze. "Since I have time, may I examine him now?" James trusted the director's judgment and nodded. He led Baiju and the director next door. Baiju had already guessed the patient was Kier. When he entered the room, he was right. The FBI had just brought her into his care. At James's signal, Baiju approached the bed and examined her. Her injuries were properly treated. She's out of immediate danger. As for why she hasn't woken, we'll need further tests. From his experience, Baiju had suspected Kier might be feigning unconsciousness, but the exam showed she truly had not regained consciousness yet. She would wake later and might then pretend to be comatose once she understood her situation. If Baiju were around, she wouldn't be able to sustain that act. Allowing a stable patient to remain unresponsive could ruin his reputation. "Sorry, Kier, your schedule's about to move up," he said, half apologetic. James accepted the assessment. With the director's endorsement, they agreed to let Baiju take over Kier's care. "Oh dear, Mr. Morikawa left so soon? What a shame. We didn't get to talk," Sonoko sighed, deflated. The confession had fizzled, and the handsome man she'd just met had vanished before she could say more. She had hoped sparks might fly between Morikawa and Shiashi, but they parted quickly. From what Sonoko had seen, they clearly weren't each other's type. Such a disappointment. After all that build-up, it had come to nothing. She fretted over her friend's stillborn romance. Conan had just gotten a text from Ms. Jody telling him that Cointreau had jumped off the building and disappeared after splitting from the others. He wore a complicated expression when he heard Sonoko's complaints. He hadn't expected her to like Cointreau so much. Conan felt a little disappointed that they hadn't caught him, but he quickly composed himself and leaned over toward Shiashi, asking with the curious bluntness of a child, "Shiashi, you haven't known Morikawa long. Why do you seem so close to him? Do you like Morikawa?" He hoped Shiashi didn't have feelings for Cointreau. If she did, she would be heartbroken. Sonoko nudged in with full gossip mode eyes. "Yeah, Shiashi, seriously, do you have some kind of special feeling for Morikawa?" Shiashi paused, thinking. "Well, There is, huh? Sonoko and Conan both exclaimed, and even Ran, who hadn't been paying attention until then, looked at Xiaxi in surprise. Xiaxi chuckled and explained, I'm teasing. I don't, not exactly like him. It's not the kind of like Sonoko has with Makoto or Ran with Shinichi. It's not like that between Shinichi and me. Ran's face flushed, and she snapped defensively before Xiaxi could finish. Xiaxi raised an eyebrow at Ran's blush, neither confirming nor denying, and Sonoko just let out a teasing little laugh. Conan lowered his head, hiding whatever expression he wore. Noel trailed behind the group. He didn't join in the conversation, but he kept a careful watch on their safety, especially Conan, the energetic child who was always on the move. Whenever something unexpected happened, Noel's attention went straight to him. Right, you said it's a special feeling, but not like Sonoko and Makoto, Sonoko pressed, elbowing Xiaxi. So what kind of feeling is it? Xiaxi tapped her chin. It's more like he feels familiar, like family, someone you want to be close to. Paimon, watching Conan's frown, couldn't help ask the traveler quietly, Traveler, why did you answer like that? What if Conan thinks you two are siblings? Xiaxi soothed Paimon in a whisper. Don't worry, he won't think that for now. After all, we don't look alike. And anyway, I'll be in contact with my brother a lot in the future. With Conan's luck, he might discover what I really look like someday, and he'll learn the truth eventually. Saying this now gives him an impression so that, if he does find out later, he'll think Cointreau, being a member of the organization, just met me and didn't let on who he was. I don't want Conan suspecting I already knew anything about the organization. I don't want him prying like he would with Toru Amuro. Paimon brightened with understanding. Oh, that makes sense. Worried that Xiaxi might get melancholy if the conversation kept going in that direction, Ran and Sonoko quickly changed the subject to gossip about celebrities. With Noel included, the group spent the walk chatting and laughing about light topics. At the organization base, Cointreau ran into another member on his way back. Only it wasn't Jin this time, it was Vermouth. She gave him a casual glance, still remembering his opportunistic tendencies and not planning to pay him much mind. She was about to turn away when she noticed Cointreau hadn't come back alone. He was accompanied by a stranger. Although Vermouth couldn't see the boy's face clearly from the corridor, she was sure there was no member in the Japanese branch who fit that teenage build. Her interest piqued. She abandoned her original plan and walked over. Cointreau, she said, amused. You who used to stay inside for 10 days at a stretch, why have you been going out so much lately? Seeing someone important. She didn't wait for an answer. She glanced at the unfamiliar boy behind him. And who is this? It's not appropriate to bring an outsider into the base. Vermouth appraised the boy and was surprised. He was astonishingly pretty. If not for a visible Adam's apple, she might have mistaken him for a girl. He looked about 15 or 16. His short hair barely reached his ears. His eyes were a striking purple, and he had a restless air. His skin was flawless. Even Vermouth, a famous actress, felt a twinge of envy. Before Cointreau could introduce him, the boy spoke up. Auntie, since you're asking about my business, why not ask me? The moment the boy called her auntie, Vermouth's sunny mood clouded over and a vein throbbed at her temple. What did you just call me? She snapped, each word sharp. Auntie, the boy repeated coolly. Seeing Vermouth get angrier, he smirked and amended. Actually, considering your age, I should probably call you grandmother. Grandmother? The insult pushed Vermouth from sullen to furious in an instant. It would only take a tiny spark to set her off. Cointreau sighed inwardly. No matter what kind of woman Vermouth was, she was always painfully sensitive about her age. Not wanting a shouting match in the hallway, he stepped between them to buy time and separate the two. Vermouth let some of her agitation out, then eyed the boy with a searching look. Few people could rile her so easily with a few words, yet the boy had. Despite her anger, she recognized there was a pointed meaning behind his comments. He knew something about her. At least he knew that her real age didn't match her youthful appearance. You call me grandmother, she said slowly. Then logically, you should call Cointreau grandfather. Why don't you? She probed to see whether the boy knew about Cointreau's own situation. Heh, I'm not stupid. Why would I go around calling people grandpa? Who do you think benefits from that? Me or them? Vermouth felt the anger she had just swallowed flare up again at his sneer and the contempt in his voice. Despite herself, she realized the boy hadn't denied what she'd said, which meant he really did know about Cointro's situation. Her eyes darkened as she turned to Cointro. It isn't proper to tell outsiders about the organization's business, is it? Cointro blinked, taken aback for a moment, then gave a helpless smile. I didn't say anything I shouldn't have. As for how he knows, he spread his hands. I don't know either. Auntie, are you blind and forgetful both? The youth grinned, mocking Vermouth. Didn't I say, if it concerns me, ask me directly? Why do you go running to outsiders for everything? I don't get how you picked up such a habit. Vermouth exhaled and forced a smile at Cointro. May I kill him? Of course not. Cointro raised an eyebrow, surprised at her impatience. They'd barely met, exchanged a few words, and she was already talking about murder. He remembered their first meeting. The boy had called him ridiculous, an idiot, said he had poor taste and was old. Cointro had mostly given him a beating. He wasn't the sort to get homicidal at an insult. I've already spoken with the boss. Balladeer, he started, then corrected himself as the boy bristled. We'll be joining the organization. He's very important right now. Don't call me Balladeer, the youth snapped. I'm no longer with that group. I left, so that name doesn't fit anymore. Only then did Vermouth realize that despite all the bickering, she didn't even know the brat's name. Then what should I call you? You told me to ask directly. Introduce yourself. She couldn't understand how a mere minor could be so important that Cointro had to report him straight to the boss. But if the boss had said it, she couldn't touch the kid. For now. She wanted to know what identity and skills made him so valuable. My name? The youth raised an eyebrow and sneered. I don't have one. Call me whatever you like. If you need something, call me Wanderer. Names don't matter to me. As for your earlier question, how I knew he was old, I used to be in the same organization as Kaya. We were part of the Fatui in Snezhnaya. Balladeer was my code name. That bit of information came up in passing from a colleague's colleague in Snezhnaya. How they knew? I don't know. And if this is such a big deal, don't blame outsiders for knowing. Maybe your organization's terrible security let it leak. Hearing his background, Vermouth finally understood why the boss had agreed to take on a minor and why he was being treated as so important. She hadn't expected such a delicate, slender child to come from that mysterious Tevat faction. When Bourbon had brought back news about Kaya's group, the intelligence division had launched a special investigation, but found almost nothing useful. The Black organization knew only what Tevat wanted them to know. Beyond that, their information was sparse. With so little intelligence, there was no way to act. Combined with the fallout from Rum's move against Dawn Winery, their relationship with Tevat was cautious, cordial, but wary. Whoever had brought this boy in would be a huge asset. Oh, fine then, Wanderer. Who was that colleague? Vermouth dropped the formalities. She had a name she could use and a lead she wanted followed. She ignored his jab about the organization's security. Engaging would only rile her up. The doctor? Dottore. The boy's voice dropped. He said the name with a venom that made it plain he held a grudge. A piece of scum who deserves to be cut into 1,000 pieces. Vermouth suspected that was why he had left Tevat. Cointro cleared his throat. Have you finished? The boss told me to put Balladeer, no Wanderer, under Jin's responsibility for now. I'm taking him to Jin. He looked at Vermouth and smiled. So could you step aside, please? Of course. Vermouth hesitated just a beat, then stepped aside with a smile. As Cointro and Wanderer passed, she didn't continue on her original way. Instead, she fell into step behind them. When Cointro glanced back in question, she tossed her hair. It's been a while since I saw Jin. A chat would be nice. Cointro didn't press it. He smiled and kept walking. They soon arrived at the training grounds, where Jin was clearly waiting. Cointro gave a brief rundown of Wanderer's situation. Jin frowned as he looked the boy over. Too thin, he noted with a frown. Jin was with the action division. He hoped this kid wouldn't be dead weight. Names mattered little. If the boy proved capable, Jin would give him a code name himself. What mattered now was discovering his abilities and why he'd chosen to join the organization. 179. The unpopular fools at Jin's question The Wanderer's face darkened, and he let out a cold laugh. Humph, nothing much. I just found out someone lied to me. I hate that man, so of course I couldn't keep working with him. The doctor you mentioned earlier? Vermouth cut in, ignoring Jin's irritated look. The Wanderer shot her a glance and answered in a single syllable. Yes. With that temper, I thought you'd storm in and kill him, not slink away like a coward. Vermouth pressed on, unfazed by his glare. Of course you wouldn't get the chance. The Wanderer's smile was eerie. That man offended the person in charge of another division, and they made him flay himself alive, 1,000 cuts and all. Shame, really. They stole the pleasure of me doing it slice by slice. Behind Jin, Vodka swallowed at the words. Were the people in the Tevat organization they'd been dealing with really that terrifying? They'd turn on their own without hesitation, and wouldn't even grant a swift death, preferring a slow, brutal punishment. If he's dead, why did you still leave? Jin asked, watching the Wanderer's expression. The answer didn't seem sufficient. Gin suspected there were other motives for joining them. The Wanderer sneered. Who told you he died? What? He survived that? Vodka blurted. Gin shot him an icy glare. Vodka immediately shut up, stepped back, and signaled he wouldn't interrupt again. Gin returned his attention to the Wanderer, waiting for more. Vermouth's eyes flickered. Her face darkened as unpleasant thoughts surfaced. He cloned himself to make experimenting easier. No idea how many copies. Whatever the number, only one remains now. Pity, the Wanderer said, feigning regret but smiling otherwise. Cloning? Surprising. I didn't realize your organization's technology had reached that level. Vermouth's voice slowed. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. Human experimentation again. So the so-called Tevat organization played with the same things. Not unusual. The old men there were always drawn to such projects. When Tevat had asked for the silver bullet research data, Vermouth had suspected they wouldn't be using it for skin cream. What she didn't know was what the Tevat boss hoped to achieve with cloning. Give it up, Auntie. Stop dreaming about cloning. It can't be done anymore. The Wanderer's habitual mockery cut her thoughts short. Why not? Vermouth asked, puzzled. Simple. We've run out of the necessary materials. The Wanderer raised an eyebrow, pleased she couldn't get what she wanted. If cloning were still possible, that bastard Dottore wouldn't have settled for a single body with no backups. And how can you be sure Mr. Dottore has only one body now? Vermouth remained skeptical. From what the Wanderer had said, Dottore was arrogant, brilliant, and cunning. How could he have allowed himself to end up in such a plight? Was Dottore the one deceiving others, or was the person in charge who forced him to abandon his bodies simply that formidable? He said so himself. I hate him, but I know him well enough. His pride would never let him lie, the Wanderer answered. Is that so? Vermouth neither agreed nor disagreed. Having gotten the information she wanted, she signaled she was done. Jin pulled out a cigarette. Vodka fumbled up a lighter and lit it for his brother. After a drag and exhale, Jin looked up. So you quit the Snezhnaya Fatui, and the Tevat boss just let you leave alive? Cointreau watched Vodka take cues from Jin so obediently and felt a twinge of envy. Vodka might be a big, dull ox, but he followed orders without backtalk and could even drive. Actually useful. Cointreau glanced at the Wanderer, whose eyes implied everyone else was trash, and remembered the old boss telling him to keep the boy close for a while. With the Wanderer around and that attitude, his future didn't look bright. Only comparison would show how good Vodka really was. Hardly a betrayal. I just quit the Snezhnaya Fatui. I didn't even get to touch Dottore before someone else beat me to it, the Wanderer sneered. Then, mockingly surprised, in your organization that counts as betrayal? Don't tell me members aren't allowed to leave. How pathetic. Not even the courage to let subordinates choose freedom. If it wasn't betrayal and you only wanted out of the Snezhnaya division, why not transfer to another department? Jin asked, ignoring the sarcasm. In his view, anyone who harmed the organization deserved worse than dismissal. Oh, I can answer that, Cointreau jumped in, trying to sound objective. When I used to talk with Kaya, he mentioned the Snezhnaya Fatui don't get along with the other sections. He corrected himself. To be precise, they've offended nearly every other section. Snezhnaya handles force within Tevat, but they stir up trouble everywhere. No one likes the Fatui. The person in charge of the Sumeru department made the Fatui's Dottore whittle himself down to a single body, and the person in charge of the Inazuma department cut down the Fatui's Signora Rosalind with one slash. Oh, right. The Inazuma person in charge is the Wanderer's mother. Cointreau nodded toward the boy. Vermouth listened with relish to the tangled web of Tevat grudges and found herself impressed. If everyone in the Fatui had a temperament like the Wanderer's, it was easy to see why they were ostracized. No wonder the boy had an extraordinary background. That explained why Cointreau wanted him in their organization. Still, with infighting this severe, their people had turned up little solid intelligence on Tevat. Their boss was clearly not to be underestimated. 180. Look, she is not my mother. The Wanderer snapped, his voice suddenly tight with emotion, the first real crack in his composure they'd seen so far. Jin and the others gave no sign of surprise. Cointreau's suggestion had likely been true. The Wanderer and this so-called mother had a strained, even hostile relationship. That was useful to them. If the Wanderer had poor ties with the Tevat organization, he would be less likely to become a liability later on. Jin kept his face neutral, but inside he was quietly pleased. Vermouth, watching, had another thought. The Wanderer claimed his mother was a department head, yet he himself was in a different department at a young age and had clearly been misled by people there. That suggested ugly complications. For reasons women often have, Vermouth felt a flicker of sympathy for him, until she realized how quickly that sympathy might be misplaced. Cointreau leaned in and murmured to Jin, ignoring the Wanderer's angry glare. They say she abandoned him because he was too fragile. I heard you. The Wanderer had excellent hearing. He caught even that low comment and shot Cointreau a look. His purple eyes burned like amethysts. Heh. Anyway, I took something very important from her later. Jin set his cigarette down and turned to Cointreau. How do you get Kaya to tell you everything? Because I'm charming, Cointreau said, puckering his lips in mock modesty. Or maybe Kaya doesn't think any of this is worth keeping secret. From what I know, Mondstadt and Kaya have a grudge against the Fatui from Snezhnaya. If the Fatui don't get what they want, he won't be sorry to see them fail. At that moment, Kaya, who had been mentioned, let out an unexpected sneeze. Who's talking about me? He thought. He picked up his phone, double-checked the message as if to make sure he hadn't misread it, then flopped back onto the couch, pressing his palm to his forehead with a weary sigh. The traveler's mess wasn't playing out as neatly as he'd hoped. Had retribution really come so quickly? Kaya lowered his hand, leaned his head against the sofa, and glanced at Klee, who was absorbed in a storybook. Klee, he said lightly, your big brother Diluk is coming soon. Aren't you excited? Klee looked up, eyes bright. Really? Big brother Diluk is coming too? Klee hasn't seen him in a long time and misses him. Then he knit his brows. Brother Kaya, Klee caused trouble before. Is big brother Diluk still angry? Kaya sat up and ruffled Klee's hair. Don't worry, Klee is too cute. Diluk won't stay mad for long. Besides, I've already made amends for what happened. Just make sure you entertain him when he gets here, okay? Klee bounced, then froze with a new worry. Oh no, Klee promised Conan he'd act with the detective boys later. Now Diluk's coming, and Klee can't go play. Klee wants to see Diluk right away. So what will you do? Kaya asked with a smile. Klee hesitated, then made up his mind. I'll tell Conan I can't play today. After Kaya nodded, Klee scampered off to the phone and placed a call. At Dr. Agasa's house, Conan put the phone down, frowning in thought. What did Klee say that made you look like that? Haibara asked when she noticed his troubled expression. It seemed a child's plea shouldn't be so weighty unless it was connected to Kaya. Conan replied, Klee apologized for not being able to play. He said his big brother Diluk is coming, so he has to wait for him. Diluk? Haibara's eyes sharpened. Conan nodded. Diluk Ragnvinder, the head of the Ragnvinder family, Kaya's sworn brother. Conan wondered why Diluk would suddenly come to Japan. Could it be tied to the Black Organization? Did Diluk know Kaya had dealings with them? The questions lingered. Back in the meeting place, Jin had finished the questions he wanted answered about the Wanderer. The Wanderer had been cooperative, with only a dash of mockery. Now Jin needed to evaluate his abilities. No matter his background, the Wanderer would join the organization, but Gin didn't want someone useless on active missions. They needed to test him to decide how to place him in future operations. Let me handle it, Cointreau volunteered. He'd already noted the Wanderer wasn't skilled with firearms, but moved lightly and had solid close combat ability. Cointreau was the only one present suited to test those traits in a fight. He also wanted the chance to rough the Wanderer up a bit, maybe shut him up. The Wanderer scoffed. Oh, beat me up? Think you can, little bug. He didn't finish the sentence before Cointreau's fist swung. 10 minutes later, Vodka and Vermouth stood watching the two of them trading blows across the open space, eyes wide with surprise.